$750,000. The math checks out. That is the first problem. 4% withdrawal rate, $30,000 a year from your portfolio. Add Social Security average around $22,000 annually for a typical American retiree, and you are sitting at roughly $52,000 per year. That is the median household income in this country. Not rich, not poor, fine. You can stop, you made it. Except here is a number the spreadsheet never includes. $172,500. That is the average lifetime healthcare bill waiting for you on the other side of the exit door, according to Fidelity's 2025 estimate. And that is only after you qualify for Medicare at 65. It does not include what happens if you leave before 65. It does not include long-term care. And it does not include the part where the market decides your first year of retirement is a good year to test the 40% drawdown scenario. There's also a number that almost no retirement calculator will show you, 42%. That is roughly the share of Americans who retired earlier than they planned last year. Not earlier by choice, earlier by layoff, diagnosis, or company restructuring. The median American expects to retire at 65. The median American actually retires at 62. That 3-year gap has survived every economic cycle for 30 years. And every year of forced early retirement is a year of withdrawals your portfolio was not designed to absorb. $750,000 is not too small to retire on. It is exactly large enough to feel like you can, and that is the most expensive psychological state in all of retirement planning. Pause. Here is what this video is actually going to do. I am going to walk you through 4 structural forces that quietly dissolve a $750,000 retirement portfolio in order from the one that surprises people first to the one they almost never see coming until it is too late. And I am going to show you the specific math behind each one, not in theory, but with real numbers. Because this is not a vibes conversation. This is engineering. The one thing I want you to hold throughout all of this is a simple image. You are filling up your car for a road trip. You put in half a tank. The GPS says the destination is 400 miles away. Half a tank does 200 miles. Math checks out. You pull out of the driveway. Except the GPS was routing you across flat Kansas highway. Your actual route cuts through the Rocky Mountains. You are towing a trailer. The fuel economy drops. And there is a slow drip from the fuel line that you did not notice in the driveway. $750,000 is half a tank in the mountains with a leak. Let's start with why you probably will not get to choose when you pull out of the driveway. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how one bad year in the stock market, at the moment you retire, can permanently damage what looked like a completely healthy portfolio. But first, here is why the timeline problem is the one that sets everything else in motion. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute's 2025 Retirement Confidence Survey, 46% of people who retired in 2025 did so earlier than they had planned. The median expected retirement age among workers right now is 65. The median actual retirement age is 62. That 3-year gap has been remarkably consistent across multiple decades of data. And it gets worse at the extremes. 30% of workers in the 2025 survey said they plan to retire at 70 or later. Only 9% of retirees reported actually doing that. Meanwhile, 12% of workers plan to retire before 60, but 27% of retirees reported that is exactly what happened. Factors entirely outside people's control drove 76% of early retirements in 2025. Health problems, layoffs, company downsizing, caregiving obligations. The Urban Institute published research showing that more than half of full-time workers in their early 50s eventually get pushed out of their jobs involuntarily due to layoffs or employer-related decisions before they are ready to retire. A separate study of 3,600 retirees aged 62 to 75 found that 58% had retired earlier than planned. Pause. The half-tank metaphor starts making sense here. You built your retirement plan assuming you would fill the tank all the way at 65 or 67. Those final 3 to 5 years are not just accumulation years. They are typically your highest earning years, your maximum 401k contribution years, your last real window for catch-up. lose them, and you are not pulling out of the driveway at 750,000. You might be leaving at 560,000, and you're doing it 3 years earlier than your model assumed, which means the money has to fund 3 additional years of withdrawals you never planned for. There is a pattern I have seen across dozens of real planning scenarios. Someone in their mid-50s, sharp, diligent saver, builds a solid target, gets to 750,000, tells everyone he is basically retired. His plan is 4 more years of contributions to push past $1 million. Then the company restructures at 58. He lands contract work at 60% of his old income. He keeps contributing, but the trajectory has shifted. He ends up retiring at 60 with $680,000. Not disaster. Not comfortable either. And what he built the original plan around, I will just work a few extra years as a safety margin, turned out to be statistically unlikely before he even needed it. You think the problem is that you need to save more. The actual problem is that most retirement math is built on an assumption that you will leave on your own schedule that has less than a 50% probability of being true. And if your entire safety margin depends on working until 67, and there is a 40+% chance you will stop at 62, you have not built a safety margin. You have built a plan that looks fine under the best case scenario. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, the YouTube algorithm has no particular reason to show you my next video. Now, stay with me here, because this next section is the one that produces the most silence in a room full of people who thought they had this figured out. You think the problem is your portfolio size. The actual problem is when the market crashes relative to your retirement date, and you have almost no control over that. Here is the mechanism. When you are accumulating, working, contributing, not withdrawing, a market crash is mostly a psychological challenge. If you are still contributing, a 30% drop means you are buying shares at a discount. Time and math work for you. In retirement, those forces reverse. You are selling shares to fund your living expenses. When the market drops 30% and you pull your annual withdrawal anyway, you are selling a larger percentage of a smaller portfolio. Those shares are gone permanently. They cannot participate in the recovery. The hole they create is structural. This is what the research calls sequence of returns risk. And the bluntest way to understand it is this. 2 retirees, same starting balance, same average return over 30 years, but the bad years happen at different ends of their retirement. One goes broke, the other leaves an inheritance. Same numbers, different order. The concrete version that gets people quiet. Someone who retired in January 2000 with $1 million and a 4% withdrawal rate walked straight into the dot-com crash and the 2008 financial crisis within their first decade. Even with the eventual recovery, the early withdrawals during those 2 drawdowns permanently impaired the portfolio. Compare that to someone who retired in January 1982, right at the start of one of the longest bull runs in American history. Same savings, same withdrawal rate, completely different outcome. Now run that through $750,000. Your 4% withdrawal is $30,000 per year. A 37% crash in year 1, which is exactly what the 2008 market delivered, drops your $750,000 to roughly $472,000. You still need $30,000 to live. That is now a withdrawal rate approaching 6.4% of your actual portfolio value. The most dangerous threat to the 4% rule is not a bad average return over 30 years. It is a market crash in the first 5 years of retirement. If your portfolio drops 40% in year 2 and you keep withdrawing the same amount, you are selling a much larger percentage of a smaller portfolio. This sequence of returns risk can permanently impair a portfolio that would otherwise have survived. The research is consistent on this. If your portfolio drops below roughly 70% of its starting value during the first 5 to 10 years after withdrawals, you are in serious danger of running out of money even if markets eventually recover. It is not the long-term average that kills you. It is the ordering of returns in the window where you are most exposed. POWs, Morningstar runs forward-looking projections instead of relying purely on historical data, and their base case safe withdrawal number has been bouncing between 3.3% and 3.9% as market conditions shift. At 3.5%, which many researchers now recommend for retirements lasting 35 years or more, your $750,000 generates $26,250 per year from the portfolio. Add Social Security, and you might be covering your expenses. Until the next mountain pass. Now, let me introduce someone. I will call him David. Not a real person by that name, a composite of real planning scenarios I've examined. David hit $750,000 at 57 and started mentally checking out of his career. His target was $750,000. He made it. He told his friends he was basically done. He was not done. Over the next 6 years, he discovered a new dimension of the problem. Approximately every 18 months, the healthcare gap, the IRMAA surcharge, the tax sequencing issue. He kept moving his target number upward, not because the math fundamentally changed, but because he kept finding new terrain the original map had not included. David is fine now. David is also the most instructive example I know of what happens when you plan around a destination instead of building a navigation system. We are going to come back to David, but first the healthcare avalanche. You think the problem is your withdrawal rate. The actual problem is what you owe before the withdrawal math even becomes fully relevant. According to Fidelity Investments' 2025 retiree healthcare cost estimate, the average 65-year-old who retired in 2025 will spend an average of $172,500 on healthcare and medical expenses throughout retirement, not including long-term care costs. Milliman's numbers run considerably higher. Under original Medicare with Medigap and Part D, a common coverage combination for more predictable out-of-pocket costs, a healthy 65-year-old woman can expect to spend approximately $113,000 on healthcare over her lifetime. A 65-year-old man can expect to spend about $275,000. Long-term care costs can range from roughly $50,000 per year for home care to more than $110,000 per year for nursing home care, with an average need of about 33 months. Even before factoring in long-term care, beyond current inflation estimates or potential increases to Medicare premiums, a middle-of-the-road couple retiring at 65 needs nearly $400,000 earmarked solely for medical and health costs. $400,000 out of a $750,000 portfolio. That is more than half the portfolio dedicated to one expense category before housing, food, transportation, or anything that looks like a retirement. But we established earlier that roughly half of Americans do not make it to 65 on schedule. And if you retire at 62, which is, again, the statistical median, you have a 3-year gap before Medicare even begins. At the end of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had lowered ACA premiums since 2021 expired and were not renewed for 2026. For early retirees, this means the subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level is back. So anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person in 2026 pays full price for marketplace coverage, which can exceed $1,500 a month at age 62 in some rating areas. Average monthly benchmark premiums for marketplace coverage escalate to $1,072 at age 62, $1,101.80 by age 63, and top out at $1,120 for ages 64 to 65. A couple retiring at 62 with no employer coverage and a silver level ACA plan costs about $1,400 per month in combined premiums. Over 3 years, that totals roughly $50,400. On top of premiums, they each face annual deductibles of $3,000, plus copays for doctor visits and prescriptions. If both use moderate healthcare services, that could add $6,000 to $8,000 per year in out-of-pocket costs. By the time they reach Medicare eligibility at 65, the couple could have spent over $70,000 on healthcare alone during those pre-Medicare years. $70,000 off the top before a single retirement expense beyond healthcare has been covered. The half tank now has less fuel than you thought before you even reach the first mountain. And here is where the story takes a turn most people never see coming, because it happens 2 years after the income decision that caused it. IRMAA, Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. It is a surcharge Medicare adds to your Part B and Part D premiums if your income exceeds specific thresholds. For 2026, Medicare beneficiaries with income over $109,000 for single tax filers, or $218,000 for joint filers, pay the surcharge. These surcharges are determined by the Social Security Administration based on modified adjusted gross income from 2 years prior. So the 2026 premium surcharge is based on your 2024 tax return. For 2026, the IRMAA Part B surcharge ranges from $81.20 to $487 per month, or $974 to $5,844 annually, on top of the base premium of $202.90. For a married couple, those numbers apply per person. The surcharge is a cliff system, meaning if your income is even $1 over a threshold, you owe the full surcharge for that entire tier. There is no gradual increase. That single dollar can cost you hundreds more per year. So here is what actually happens to the careful retiree who does everything right. He retires at 62. He has $750,000 in a traditional 401k. He knows he should start Roth conversions to reduce his future required minimum distributions and manage his long-term tax exposure, which is genuinely smart planning. He converts $100,000 in year one. 2 years later, when Medicare begins at 65, the Social Security Administration looks at his income from 2 years prior, $100,000 in Roth conversion income, $30,000 in portfolio withdrawals, roughly $18,000 in taxable Social Security income. His modified adjusted gross income is approximately $148,000. He is well into the second IRMAA tier. He receives a Medicare bill that is significantly higher than he planned for, based on income that no longer reflects his situation because the 2-year look back captured the year he was optimizing his tax position and treated it as high income evidence. Wait, am I being penalized for Roth conversions? Not penalize structurally taxed twice, once in income tax on the conversion and once in elevated Medicare premiums 2 years later, unless you time the conversions to stay under the IRMAA cliff. IRMAA is divided into income brackets. And once your income crosses into a higher bracket, your surcharge jumps to the next level. Even a small increase in income near one of these thresholds can have an outsized impact. Go just $1 over a bracket boundary and you owe the full surcharge for that higher tier, not a prorated amount. Stay just below it, and you avoid the increase altogether. A laugh I genuinely cannot suppress. Honey, I went just a few $1,000s over the IRMAA bracket this year. How much did that cost us? Several thousand in extra Medicare premiums. So the penalty is almost as large as the income that triggered it? Welcome to the system. Now, the final mountain pass on this road trip. And this is the one that makes $750,000 specifically. Not $400,000, not $1.2 million, but exactly this number, uniquely dangerous. At 3% annual inflation, which is historically conservative and lower than the actual inflation experienced in the early part of this decade, the cost of living doubles approximately every 24 years. If inflation runs even slightly higher, this doubling occurs even sooner. A 62-year-old retiring today who lives to 86 has exactly a 24-year retirement, which means the $30,000 per year your $750,000 portfolio generates at 4% needs to be $60,000 per year by year 24 to buy the exact same things. If you require $50,000 annually for expenses today, you will need approximately $90,500 annually in 20 years, assuming 3% inflation just to maintain your current lifestyle. That is not an edge case. That is the baseline. And healthcare inflation runs faster than general inflation. Healthcare inflation moves faster and with more volatility than general inflation. Drug pricing trends, hospital fees, utilization rates, and demographic factors push medical costs higher, and most of these forces sit entirely outside an individual's control. Milliman estimates healthcare inflation at approximately 4.7% annually. At that rate, A $15,000 annual healthcare expense in year 1 of retirement becomes approximately $30,000 by year 16. By year 25, it could exceed $47,000 per year just in healthcare. Now, here is the compound trap that nobody sits with long enough. Your portfolio generates $30,000 per year at 4%. 20 years of 3% general inflation means you need roughly $54,000 per year to maintain the same real spending. The gap between what you planned to draw and what you actually need has grown by $24,000 per year. Your portfolio, meanwhile, has been paying out those inflation-adjusted withdrawals and absorbing whatever market returns it received. In many historical scenarios, a $750,000 portfolio at 4% withdrawal is still alive at year 20. In many scenarios involving a market crash in years 1 through 5, it is not. Pause. The original creator of the 4% rule, William Bengen, published updated research in 2025 and revised his number to 4.7% as the historical worst-case safe withdrawal rate for a 30-year retirement. Retirees who use a 4.7% withdrawal rate may be sacrificing on average about 35% per year in withdrawals, a considerable reduction in lifestyle. Meanwhile, Morningstar's forward-looking analysis keeps their base case in the 3.3 to 3.9% range, depending on conditions. Many researchers now suggest 3.5% for 35-year retirements and 3 to 3.3% for 40 to 50-year retirements. At 3.5%, your $750,000 portfolio generates $26,250 per year, not $30,000. And if healthcare inflation runs at 4.7% annually while your withdrawal is fixed in real terms, the portion of your income consumed by healthcare alone expands every year. But here is the part about $750,000 specifically that goes deeper than the math. There is a psychological event that happens when you reach this number. Below roughly $400,000, people know they are not done. They stay vigilant. They keep grinding. They stay humble about the gap between where they are and where they need to be. Above, say, 1.5 million, the buffers are real, and the flexibility to absorb the 4 forces I've described is genuinely present. At 750,000, something different happens. You feel like you have won. The magic number Americans think they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is $1.46 million. That is the stated target. But 750,000 is more than half of that. And at some specific moment, the brain makes the comparison, I have more than half of what I need, and the 4% rule technically works, and the calculator says I'm fine, and it shifts from vigilant accumulation mode into arrival mode. You relax the savings rate slightly, you start treating yourself because you feel like you have earned it. You stop running monthly checks on your allocations. Over half of American households, 54%, report having no dedicated retirement savings at all, according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. You are already dramatically ahead of the median. That knowledge, combined with a portfolio that checks all the basic math boxes, creates the exact cognitive environment in which you stop doing the work that would catch the 4 problems I have just described before they compound. This is the confidence trap. The number 750,000 is dangerous, not just because it is mathematically vulnerable to the 4 forces we covered, but because it is psychologically engineered to stop you from noticing those forces until you are already committed to the route that runs through them. David, our composite, hit his number at 57 and spent 6 months in this exact psychological state before his first healthcare calculation brought him back to earth. He recalculated, kept working on his own terms for 6 more years, rebuilt the plan from a system perspective instead of a destination perspective. And the interesting thing about David is that his actual retirement portfolio number ended up lower than $1 million. Not because he's settled, because once you build the system correctly, the buffer assets for sequence risk, the Roth conversion timing to manage IRMAA, the Social Security delay strategy to maximize lifetime income, the healthcare cost plan year by year, the specific destination number becomes less central than the architecture around it. One more number. In the 2025 EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey, 75% of workers said they plan to work for pay in retirement. Only 29% of retirees reported actually doing so. This gap has remained remarkably stable over more than 2 decades of surveys. Workers who plan to supplement retirement income with part-time work are essentially building that assumption into their financial model. When it does not materialize due to health, a lack of suitable opportunities, or the simple reality that retirement feels very different from working, it leaves a meaningful hole in the budget that was never explicitly accounted for. But I am different. I genuinely plan to work. I have seen this plan. The plan usually survives contact with retirement for approximately 12 to 18 months before the combination of lifestyle, health, or the genuine exhaustion of decades of employment makes it impractical. Now, here is the case study. Real numbers. Call him Mark, 58 years old, mid-cost, state, corporate IT career. He wants to exit at 62. He has $750,000 in a traditional 401k, no Roth accounts, no pension. His retirement plan, $30,000 per year from the portfolio at 4%, $22,000 per year from Social Security claimed at 62, and $12,000 per year budgeted for healthcare. Total projected income, $64,000 per year. He does not feel rich, but he feels fine. Problem 1, the Social Security math. Beginning benefits at 62 reduces the monthly payout by as much as 30% compared to full retirement age. The difference between claiming at 62 versus 70 is a permanent 54 percentage point gap in monthly income for life. If Mark's full retirement age benefit would have been $29,000 per year, he is collecting $22,000 by claiming early. That is $7,000 per year permanently forfeited. Over a 23-year lifespan from retirement, that gap compounds to approximately $161,000 in foregone income. He chose to claim early because he needed the income to bridge the gap. But by doing so, he permanently reduced the one source of guaranteed inflation-adjusted income he had. Problem 2, the healthcare reality check. His $12,000 annual healthcare budget for a 62-year-old in 2026 is already short of reality before he makes a single doctor's visit. Paying about $12,000 to $13,000 per year in premiums per person can consume a notable portion of annual retirement income. And that is just the premium. Each person faces annual deductibles of roughly $3,000, plus co-pays for doctor visits and prescriptions. If using moderate healthcare services, that adds $6,000 to $8,000 more per year in out-of-pocket costs per couple. Mark, as a single retiree, is still looking at $15,000 to $17,000 in realistic year-one healthcare costs. His budget is already short by $3,000 to $5,000 in year one. Problem 3, the IRMAA trap, ticking in slow motion. Mark starts doing Roth conversions in his early retirement years, which is textbook smart tax planning. He converts $100,000 in year one. His taxable income for that year, $100,000 from the conversion, $30,000 from portfolio withdrawals, and approximately $18,000 in taxable Social Security income. His modified adjusted gross income is approximately $148,000. Social Security uses his tax return from 2 years prior, so his Medicare surcharges when he enrolls at 65 are based on the income from this earlier high conversion year. By the time he receives the surcharge notice, the income that triggered it is already in the past. His Medicare premiums are significantly higher than he planned in the first years of enrollment. Problem 4, the sequence trap arriving on schedule. 14 months into retirement, a market correction drops equities by 32%. Mark's $750,000 401k falls to approximately $510,000. He withdraws $30,000 that year because that is the budget. His withdrawal rate on the actual portfolio is now roughly 5.9%. By year 3, even after partial recovery, the portfolio is below $450,000. He is 65. His healthcare costs are rising. His portfolio has been permanently impaired by the combination of withdrawals into a downturn in the exact years that matter most. Mark is not stupid. Mark did not fail. Mark followed the most commonly cited retirement planning framework in the country, calibrated it accurately, and ran into 4 simultaneously operating forces that the framework does not model because the framework was designed for simplicity, not for the actual terrain of a 30-year retirement. Here is what the framework should have been. 3 levels of retirement math. Not one number, 3 levels. Level 1 is the calculator math. Multiply expected spending by 25. Apply 4%. Get a target number. This is useful for general orientation. It is useless for actual planning because it models one variable, your average return, while assuming all others stay constant. This is the level that produces 750,000 as a target and tells you to stop there. Level 2 is the stress test math. Take the level 1 number and run it through 4 stress conditions simultaneously. A forced early exit 3 years ahead of plan. A 30 to 40% market crash in year 1 or 2. Healthcare costs that run 100,000 to 300,000 over and above what you budgeted. And 3% annual inflation compounding over 20 plus years with healthcare inflation running faster. At level 2, 750,000 does not survive all 4 conditions simultaneously. The target number that does survive them, depending on your specific situation, is meaningfully different. Level 3 is the system. Not a static number, but a dynamic architecture. A buffer account 2 to 3 years of living expenses in liquid, stable instruments that exist specifically to prevent you from selling equities during a bad year 1 scenario. A dynamic withdrawal approach that reduces distributions in down markets and rebuilds reserves in up markets instead of treating the 4% as a rigid floor. A Social Security bridge strategy that funds your living expenses from portfolio withdrawals during the gap years between retirement and age 70 in exchange for a permanently higher monthly benefit that begins at 70 and inflates with COLA for the rest of your life. And a Roth conversion schedule in the years between retirement and Medicare enrollment, the window where your income is lower and conversions are cheapest, designed to stay below the IRMAA threshold that will govern your Medicare costs 2 years after each conversion. Here is the part that almost never gets said clearly enough. Knowing these 4 problems exist does not mean your retirement requires $1.5 million. It means your retirement requires architecture. The number matters less than what you build around it. David, the guy from our subplot, eventually stopped chasing the moving target and built the architecture instead. Mapped healthcare costs year by year, including IRMAA exposure from his IRA balance projections. Ran 3 retirement date scenarios and modeled forced exit probability for each. Built a 2-year buffer in short duration treasuries as a sequence shield. Structured Roth conversions to stay under the IRMAA cliff during the transition years. He retired with a portfolio number below $1 million on a plan he could stress test without it collapsing in the mountains, with enough fuel and a gauge he could trust. 3 specific moves calibrated to exactly the 750,000 danger zone. First, price your healthcare before you price your retirement, not a round number estimate. Go to healthcare.gov today and price a silver plan for your exact age and zip code for the year you plan to retire. Add realistic deductibles and out-of-pocket at moderate utilization. Build that number into your retirement budget as a fixed cost. Then check whether your planned withdrawal strategy keeps you below the ACA subsidy cliff, which in 2026 is $62,600 of modified adjusted gross income for a single person. And remember, the enhanced subsidies that cushioned that cliff expired at the end of 2025. One slightly larger portfolio withdrawal or one Roth conversion can wipe out thousands in premium support, and nobody will warn you in advance. Second, run the year 1 crash simulation right now. Take your projected portfolio at your target retirement date, drop it by 35% in month 1, maintain your planned annual withdrawal for the full first year, and check your portfolio balance at year 5 under that scenario. If it is below 55% of your starting balance, you do not have enough buffer for sequence of returns risk at your current number and timeline. The correction is usually not save more. The correction is often a liquidity buffer of 2 to 3 years of expenses in stable instruments that you spend first during a downturn, protecting your equity portfolio from forced selling at the worst possible prices. Third, replace your retirement number with a retirement system. A single target, 750,000, 1 million, 1.5 million is a psychological destination. It does not model your withdrawal rate as a function of market conditions. It does not account for IRMAA as a function of your distribution strategy. It does not price in healthcare inflation versus general inflation. The difference between a retirement plan built around a number and a retirement plan built around a system is roughly equivalent to the difference between navigating with a destination and navigating with a map that includes the terrain, the fuel requirements for that terrain, and the locations of every gas station between here and there. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And $750,000 built more retirement anxiety than almost any other number in the entire financial planning landscape, because it is exactly convincing enough to stop people from building the thing they actually need.